What happens when a group of privileged boys, led by one with a twisted sense of entitlement, decide to destroy someone who shines too brightly? How far will they go to feed their egos, to control a girl who never asked to be part of their game? And when everything spirals out of control, who will be left to pick up the pieces? This is a story of love, betrayal, and the deadly consequences of a secret too dark to stay hidden. Are you ready to uncover the truth behind Emma's tragic end? Buckle up, because once you step into this tale, there's no turning back. In the peaceful suburbs of Willow Creek, Emma was a name whispered with awe. She was the kind of girl who excelled at everything: academics, music, art. Whatever she touched seemed to turn to gold. Her voice was a melody that enchanted all who heard it, and her artistic talent was the envy of everyone. But what set Emma apart wasn't just her talent, but her heart, a heart so open and kind. It shone in everything she did. While her teachers adored her, her classmates simmered with jealousy, none more so than Ethan. Ethan came from a wealthy family, a boy who had grown up surrounded by privilege. With his handsome features and natural charisma, he was used to getting everything he wanted except for Emma's brilliance. And worse, he knew Emma didn't see him the way she saw someone else. That someone else was Jake, a boy from a different class. Unlike Ethan, Jake wasn't wealthy. He wasn't polished or sophisticated, but he had a warmth, a kindness that drew Emma in. Jake wasn't just her boyfriend, he was her confidant, her escape from the pressures of being perfect. Where Emma was gentle and graceful, Jake was adventurous and bold. They balanced each other, creating a love that felt effortless, like it was meant to be. Their relationship was one of stolen moments and hidden smiles. In the back of the library, under the bleachers after school, behind the large oak tree on the school grounds, they found their places, their sanctuary. When they were alone, Emma would lean into Jake, and he'd wrap his arms around her, holding her as though she were something precious, something fragile. It was in those moments, when the world melted away, that their romance flourished. Jake would brush his fingers through her hair, tracing the soft curve of her cheek before pulling her into a kiss. Their kisses were soft at first, hesitant, as though they were both afraid of breaking the spell. But as their feelings deepened, so did their touch. Jake would cradle her face in his hands, kissing her with a passion that made Emma's heart race. She could feel the intensity in the way his lips moved against hers, the way his hands held her close. When they weren't kissing, they were touching, always finding ways to be connected. Emma would often rest her head on Jake's shoulder, and he would pull her closer, his hands slipping around her waist, his fingers tracing small circles on her back. There was something electric in the way they touched, a spark that neither of them could deny. One night, when the moon hung low in the sky, they snuck out to meet under the stars. Jake pulled Emma into his lap, holding her tightly as the cool night air wrapped around them. They kissed, slowly, savoring the taste of each other, the feel of their bodies pressed together. His hands roamed gently over her back, her arms, her waist, as though trying to memorize every inch of her. Emma shivered under his touch, her breath hitching as his fingers grazed her skin. "I love you," he whispered against her lips, his voice husky with emotion. "I love you too," Emma breathed, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him again, deeper this time. They lost themselves in each other that night, oblivious to the fact that they were being watched. Ethan, who had followed them, his jealousy burning hotter with every kiss, every touch he witnessed, stood in the shadows with a camera in hand. His mind churned with a sinister plan, one that would make Emma pay for all the ways she had outshined him. For now, though, Emma and Jake were blissfully unaware, wrapped in each other's arms, savoring the innocence of their love. The air in Willow Creek High School grew thicker with unspoken words as Emma and Jake's secret love story unfolded. But while they reveled in the warmth of their growing connection, jealousy brewed in the hearts of those who watched from afar, especially in Ethan's. Ethan had always had everything handed to him. His father's wealth opened doors that most people couldn't even dream of. But what he couldn't buy was Emma's attention. That nod at him, no matter how many girls swooned over him, no matter how popular he was, it was Emma who captivated everyone. Her laughter, her grace, her undeniable talent, it was a spotlight that left Ethan in the shadows. He couldn't stand it. At first, it was just the jealousy that gnawed at his insides like a slow-burning fire. But when he saw her with Jake, it ignited into something darker. The way she smiled at Jake, The way her eyes sparkled when they were together, Ethan had never seen her like that with anyone else. She looked at Jake like he was her whole world, and for Ethan, that was unbearable. It wasn't long before his jealousy turned into obsession. Ethan began to follow them first out of curiosity, then out of spite. He watched as they held hands in hidden corners of the school, saw the way Jake would wrap his arms around Emma, holding her close, whispering things that made her blush. Each stolen kiss, each tender moment, only fueled his anger. Why should someone like Jake pour, unnoticed, have what he couldn't? One evening, when the school was deserted, Ethan's chance came. Emma and Jake had snuck into the art room, their usual spot for stealing away from the world. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows as they stood close to each other, the air between them charged with desire. Jake leaned in, his lips brushing against Emma's in a slow, lingering kiss. Their kisses grew more heated, their touches more urgent, as they pressed against each other, lost in the intensity of the moment. Ethan had followed them, lurking just outside the door, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fury and excitement. He watched as Emma's shirt slipped off her shoulder, saw the way Jake's hands moved over her body with a familiarity that made his blood boil. In that moment, something snapped in Ethan. This wasn't just about jealousy anymore, this was about control, about power. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling with adrenaline, and began to record. Through the small crack in the door, he captured everything. Every kiss, every touch, every heated whisper between them. The camera lens didn't miss a thing as their clothes came off, as their bodies pressed together in a moment of raw, unguarded intimacy. Ethan's heart raced as he filmed their secret, knowing he now held something far more powerful than any of his father's money could buy. The next day, Emma had no idea her world was about to fall apart. She walked through the halls, smiling as usual, her heart still warm from the night before with Jake. But that warmth quickly froze when she opened her locker and found a single envelope inside. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the note. "Meet me behind the gym at lunch. Alone. Or everyone will know who you really are." Her stomach twisted with fear. She had no idea who had left the note, but the icy dread in her chest told her it was serious. She couldn't breathe as she made her way to the gym, her mind racing with 1,000 terrible thoughts. When she got there, Ethan was waiting. He greeted her with a smirk, his eyes gleaming with a cruelty she had never seen before. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and played the video. Emma's world collapsed around her as she watched herself on the screen, every private moment between her and Jake laid bare. The kisses, the touches, the intimacy, it was all there, recorded and ready to be used against her. "Delete it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, Ethan, this is private." Ethan shook his head, his smirk deepening. "Oh, I don't think so, Emma. You see this video? It's my ticket. You're going to do exactly what I say, or I'll make sure everyone in school sees it." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on her, suffocating her. Her mind raced with the consequences. If that video got out, it would ruin everything. Her reputation, her future, her relationship with Jake, it would all be destroyed. The thought of her parents seeing it, of the entire school whispering about her, filled her with a paralyzing fear. I can't," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, Ethan, I can't." "You don't have a choice," he said coldly, stepping closer, his eyes boring into hers. "You're mine now, Emma, for as long as I want." Emma felt her knees buckle, the weight of his words crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had never felt so helpless, so vulnerable. Ethan had taken her love, her privacy, and twisted it into something dark and dangerous. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next 7 days would change everything. Emma couldn't sleep that night. The video replayed in her mind, tormenting her with its cruel reality. Ethan's words echoed in her ears, "You're mine now, Emma. For as long as I want." She felt a sense of doom looming over her, something dark and terrifying. She couldn't tell Jake. She couldn't bear the shame, the look of betrayal on his face if he knew what Ethan had over her. She didn't want to ruin what they had, their love so pure and perfect, now tainted by the threat of that video. The next day, she made up her mind. She would go to Ethan alone. She would beg for his mercy, plead for forgiveness. She thought maybe, just maybe, he would understand. Maybe there was some humanity left in him. She sent Jake a quick message, lying that she wasn't feeling well and needed to be alone for a while. The guilt twisted her insides, but she had no other choice. With heavy steps, she made her way to the location Ethan had texted her, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, a place she had never been. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached, the ominous structure looming in the distance, its windows dark and lifeless. When she entered, the air inside was cold, and the silence was deafening. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb, casting long shadows against the walls. But what made her heart stop was the sight of Ethan, lounging against an old couch, a cruel smile on his face. He wasn't alone. 5 other boys were with him, each one grinning like they had been waiting for her. Emma's stomach twisted with dread. Something felt terribly wrong. "I came to talk," she said, her voice trembling as she tried to hold her composure. "Please, Ethan, I'm begging you. Just delete the video. I'll do anything." Ethan chuckled, a low, mocking sound that sent chills down her spine. "Anything, huh?" He stood up and walked over to her, circling her like a predator. "I'm not interested in talking, Emma." Her breath hitched as he came closer, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She flinched, stepping back, but there was nowhere to go. The others had risen from their seats, forming a circle around her, their eyes gleaming with a dark hunger. "You're going to do exactly what I say," Ethan whispered, his lips close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Or I'll ruin you." Emma's knees felt weak as she stood frozen, the weight of his threat pressing down on her. Before she could say anything, Ethan's hands were on her, pulling her into him, his mouth pressing against hers in a kiss that felt like poison. His lips moved forcefully, claiming her with a roughness that made her want to scream, but no sound came out. Her mind screamed no, but her body was paralyzed by fear. The others closed in around her, their hands reaching out to touch her, their fingers trailing over her arms, her waist, her neck. Each touch sent a wave of disgust and terror through her, but she was trapped, their bodies pressing against hers from all sides. Ethan's kisses were relentless, his hands roaming over her, pulling her tighter into him as though she belonged to him. Tears welled in her eyes as the others began to join in, their lips brushing her skin, their hands claiming what wasn't theirs to take. She tried to push them away, to fight, but they were too many, and her strength was nothing compared to the collective force of their desire. The room felt like it was spinning as they surrounded her, their touches becoming more insistent, more invasive. Ethan's mouth moved down her neck, his hands gripping her tighter, and soon, the others followed. They kissed her, pulled her close, their bodies pressing against hers in a twisted mockery of romance. But there was nothing romantic about this. It was a violation, a betrayal of everything she had ever believed in, and she couldn't escape. For 7 days, they kept her there, using her like she was nothing more than an object. The kisses, the touches, the whispered threats never stopped. They fed off her fear, her helplessness, each one taking their turn as they passed her between them like she was some prize they had won. Ethan's cruel smile never left his face, his dominance over her complete. Outside, the world continued as usual, oblivious to the horror happening within the abandoned building. Emma's friends wondered where she had gone, her teachers asked questions, and poor Jake was growing more worried with each passing day. He sent her messages, called her phone, but got no response. The longer Emma stayed missing, the more his heart sank. He didn't understand. They had been so happy, so in love. Why would she just disappear? As the days passed, whispers began to circulate around the school. People speculated, but no one knew the truth. No one knew that the girl they all admired, the girl who had been so full of life and love, was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The room had become a prison, each passing hour a suffocating reminder of the nightmare Emma couldn't escape. 7 days. 7 days of torture, humiliation, and endless torment. Her body ached from the constant assault, her mind numb from the relentless degradation. She had stopped counting the hours, stopped wondering when it would end. She was exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. She was a shell of who she had been. Emma's once vibrant spirit had been crushed, beaten down by the twisted games Ethan and his friends played. Their laughter echoed in her ears, their voices haunting her even when they weren't there. The kisses, the touches, the way they passed her between them like she was nothing it was more than she could bear. She had tried to fight, to push them away, but they were too strong, too many. Each time she resisted, they came back harder, rougher, determined to break her. And now, as the seventh day dawned, something inside her snapped. She lay curled up on the cold floor of the abandoned building, her clothes torn, her body bruised and battered. The stench of sweat and fear clung to her skin, a constant reminder of what had been done to her. She no longer cried, her tears had run dry days ago. All that was left was a hollow, aching emptiness. Ethan stood over her, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. He had won. He had taken everything from her, her dignity, her pride, her sense of self. She was his completely and utterly. The others were gathered around, laughing and jeering as they prepared for one final, brutal assault. "I think it's time we finish this," Ethan said, his voice dripping with malice. Emma didn't move. She didn't have the strength anymore. She was so tired of the pain, of the fear, of the constant struggle to survive. She wanted it to end. She wanted the darkness to take her, to swallow her whole, and take her away from this horror. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. Ethan grabbed her roughly by the arm, dragging her to her feet. The others closed in, their hands reaching for her, their touches more violent than ever before. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as they forced her down, her body trembling with terror. The room seemed to spin as they took her again, this time with a cruelty she hadn't experienced before. They were rough, their hands gripping her too tightly, their mouths biting instead of kissing. There was nothing left of the twisted romance they had pretended to show her. Now, it was all about domination, destruction. Emma's vision blurred as the pain became too much, her mind shutting down to protect itself from the horror. She could feel her body giving up, her heart slowing, the edges of her consciousness fraying as the darkness crept in. She knew, deep down, that this was it. She wasn't going to survive this. As the final wave of pain washed over her, Emma's last thought was of Jake. She wished she had told him the truth. She wished she could see him one last time, feel his arms around her, his lips on hers. But it was too late now. The world was slipping away, and all she could do was let go. When it was over, her body lay still on the cold, dirty floor. The room was silent, the laughter and jeers replaced by a tense, uncomfortable quiet. Ethan stared down at her, his brow furrowed. He nudged her with his foot, but Emma didn't move. Her chest didn't rise or fall. She was gone. "Shit," one of the boys muttered, his voice shaky. "What do we do now?" Ethan's face paled as the reality of the situation set in. They had gone too far. This wasn't a game anymore. This was murder. "We need to get out of here," Ethan hissed, panic creeping into his voice. "Now." They scrambled to gather their things, fear and adrenaline pumping through their veins. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving Emma's lifeless body behind, abandoned in the darkness. The search for Emma began the next day. Jake had grown frantic, his calls and texts unanswered for days. He had gone to her house, asked her friends, but no one knew where she was. The police were called, and soon, an official investigation was launched. Flyers went up around the town, Emma's face plastered everywhere missing. Last seen a week ago. As the days passed, the town buzzed with rumors. People whispered about what might have happened, theories flying about. But Jake knew, deep in his heart, that something was terribly wrong. Emma would never just disappear without a word. She loved him. They had been so happy, so in love. Something bad had happened. He could feel it. The police began their search, combing through Emma's phone records, questioning her friends and classmates. It didn't take long for them to uncover the tensions between Emma and Ethan, the jealousy, the rumors, the way Ethan had watched her so closely. Suspicion grew as CCTV footage from nearby buildings showed Ethan and his friends frequenting the abandoned building where Emma had been last seen. As the investigation deepened, so did the fear that something terrible had happened to Emma. And soon, the truth would come to light. The DNA evidence, the surveillance footage, the testimonies, it would all point to one horrifying conclusion. Emma had been taken. And now, she was never coming back. The discovery of Emma's lifeless body in the abandoned building sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. The search had ended in tragedy, and the entire town mourned the loss of a bright, talented girl whose life had been cruelly cut short. For Jake, the grief was unbearable. The girl he loved had been stolen from him in the most horrific way, and now, all that was left was the search for justice. The investigation quickly zeroed in on Ethan and his group of friends. CCTV footage from nearby streets placed them at the scene, and DNA evidence from the crime scene sealed their fate. There was no doubt about their involvement. As the details emerged, the town was horrified to learn the extent of the abuse Emma had endured in her final days, the blackmail, the torment, the cruelty that had led to her death. The trial that followed was swift but emotionally charged. The courtroom was packed with people seeking answers, justice, and closure. Ethan and his friends sat in the defendant's seats, their faces pale as the prosecutor laid out the grim details of what they had done. Emma's family sat in silent anguish, their grief palpable, while Jake could barely bring himself to look at the monsters who had taken everything from him. The prosecution painted a clear picture of a group of entitled boys who had used their power and privilege to manipulate and torture an innocent girl. The evidence was overwhelming: CCTV footage, DNA samples, and the damning video Ethan had recorded of Emma and Jake, which had been the catalyst for the entire tragedy. Witnesses testified to Ethan's jealousy, his obsession with Emma, and his growing hostility toward Jake. The defense tried to argue that it had all been a terrible mistake, that they hadn't intended for Emma to die. But the jury saw through the weak excuses. They knew what had been done. They had seen the cruelty and malice in Ethan's eyes as he had blackmailed and abused Emma. There was no forgiveness for that. After a short deliberation, the jury returned their verdict guilty on all counts, including charges of murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The courtroom was silent as the judge handed down the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole for Ethan and the others. It was the harshest punishment the law could give, but it didn't bring Emma back. It didn't erase the pain and suffering she had endured, nor did it heal the wounds left in the hearts of those who loved her. For Jake, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it couldn't fill the emptiness left by Emma's absence. He would never forget the girl he had loved, their stolen moments, their kisses, their dreams of a future that would never come. But in the end, all he could do was move forward, carrying her memory with him as he tried to rebuild his shattered life. The town of Willow Creek would never forget Emma, and her story would serve as a reminder of the darkness that jealousy and cruelty could bring. But in the end, justice had been done, and the people responsible for her death would spend the rest of their lives paying for their crime. And so, the story came to a close, tragic, heartbreaking, but with justice served.